Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders and experts to talk about their journeys and explore the link between personal and business success. I'm your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve, a coaching, training and development company focused on enabling business and personal success and creating a community of like-minded individuals. Whether that be through our peer groups, one-to-one coaching, our training and development programs for you and your teams, or through our content and events, our mission is to get the best out of each individual and inspire them to be better both in life and in business. If you want to learn more about Evolve, including our beautiful co-working space in Ashley Cross in Poole, then please go to evolvemembers.com, where you'll find great content, insights, details of all of our services, and also information on our forthcoming events. For now though, let's get on with the show. Welcome to this week's episode. Today I'm talking to Jennifer Geary, author of two books, How to be a Chief Risk Officer and How to be a Chief Operating Officer. Jennifer is a senior executive with over 25 years experience in the finance, technology, risk and legal sectors, as well as non-profit organisations. She is also a mentor to emerging startup businesses. Jennifer has poured all of her wisdom and experience gained from working across so many sectors into her two books. And I was really keen to get her on the show to talk about what are the roles of a Chief Operating Officer and a Chief Risk Officer and how that relates to an SME business. That dynamic between a founder and a COO can be a challenging one. There are so many factors involved, not least of which are deciding when you need a COO and how to get the right one. As Jennifer says, a lot of that boils down to having self-awareness about the things that you're good at and the things you're not so good at, and finding the right fit of personalities. But as I'm sure many of us out there will attest, it's not as simple as it may sound. We also have a great discussion around the role of a Chief Risk Officer and the skill behind navigating that delicate balance between minimising risk without stifling development. Jennifer then speaks very eloquently about the personal resilience she's gained through years of shouldering the enormous responsibility and pressures that have come with her roles as both COO and CRO. For anyone wanting to understand these roles better and are wondering whether you need either or both, this conversation will answer just about any questions you might have. Please enjoy the conversation. Welcome to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Hello, Warren. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you as a guest. We're going to explore the roles of a Chief Operating Officer and the role of a Chief Risk Officer in this episode. You're the author of two books, How to be a Chief Risk Officer is the most recent release, and also How to be the Chief Operating Officer. So clearly lots of knowledge. And looking at your CV and kind of backstory, some strong roles there, both in corporate life and in the charitable sector, and I'm sure we'll lean on some of that during the course of our conversation. But really want to get into it as to how perhaps those roles do apply in the SME, owner-managed business role. But I suppose first, shall we define the two roles? So what is the role of a Chief Operating Officer and what is the role of a Chief Risk Officer, Jennifer?
Okay, let's get straight in. So, of course, the first thing to say is that these roles do vary, and they vary across depending on the sector that you work in and the size of your organization. So I can give a general overview, and then, of course, things can be tailored to individual situations. But a Chief Operating Officer, as the name suggests, is responsible for the running of the operations of an organization, and I'll define that in a second. You're quite often the second in command of the organization, so the number two to the chief executive. And when I set out to write the book, I counted 16 disciplines that can fall under the role of COO, and basically wrote a chapter on each. That's what formed the backbone of the book. And even when I did that, I had people come back to me and say, "Oh, you forgot research and development, or you forgot that," or there was other areas as well. But the main categories that I cover in the book are areas like operations, HR, human resources, finance, legal, compliance, supply chain, internal and external communications, safeguarding, and that's not 16 because a couple have gone out of my mind. But essentially, yeah, and obviously all the customer servicing side of the business as well. The role can be as different as the CEO COO interplay, and I think that's something that I touch on in there, which is a COO role doesn't exist standalone at all. You're often there to provide backup or provide skills and expertise to kind of complement the CEO and also to complement their personality. So there's a standard set of things that can be included under the role, and then obviously it depends after that, depending on the situation.
And the role of a chief risk officer?
Yeah, chief risk officer is probably a little more consistently defined. The chief risk officer heads up what they call the second line of defense in an organization. That's quite a technical term. It's well understood in financial services and some regulated industries. But basically what it says is that if you're in operations, if you're the COO, you are taking care of running the business. You are doing the things that the organization needs to do. The chief risk officer acts as a little bit of a counter, a foil to that, somebody to provide some oversight, some knowledge of the risk environment, and also to kind of challenge those front office areas, those first line areas, to say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? There's a new regulation here. There's a risk come out there. Are you really as solid in that area as you thought that you might be? It's very well understood, as I say, in some of the regulated industries. But, I have done the role both in very large organizations, large scale banks. I've been in the risk function of large scale banks. And then I've also been CRO of very, very small startup, fintech challenger bank, and had to build the operation out from there. So it can apply in a number of situations.
Fantastic. And out of those two roles, clearly the one I think that applies more to the kind of SME business and the owner-managed business is that role of the COO. So we'd like to just explore that further with you, because actually a couple of things of what you said kind of come into play, doesn't it? And I think one of the challenges with a founder, the start in that kind of business, high growth, ambitious growth startup, is the founder does everything. They are the MD, CEO, COO, chief bottle washer, everything. But there comes a time and a need where they need to release some of that, and probably the natural release is to employ somebody, that number two, that COO, as you kind of describe. But I suppose the question is, if that dynamic between the number one and the number two is so important, how do you get that dynamic to really work? And in your real life experiences, have you got any stories that you would relate to?
Yeah, sure. There's two things there, isn't there? There's kind of like, when do I need a COO, and then how do I know I'm going to get the right fit for me? So I advise quite a lot of companies and organizations, I'm talking to a number at the moment who are just at that sort of that cusp, that tipping point. You've got a founder and a small team. If it's software, it's developers or whatever your business line is, and you're hitting that point of success. You're hitting that point of scale. Perhaps you're taking on some investment, and you can afford now to broaden your team. And you're starting to think, you've got an idea, you've got something that's showing really good signs of working, but now you're going to need to scale it in a way that you never have before. And also, as a CEO, you're probably thinking about the stakeholder group that you have to manage, the outward-facing aspect of your organization, the brand, the presence, all that kind of thing. And you just need the operations of the organization to work, right? You need whatever it is, customer service, order fulfillment, software delivery, whatever those things are, they need to start working, and you as a CEO need to stop worrying about them. So those are some of the indicators that that it might be time to kind of start thinking about that role. The other thing, of course, is whatever your kind of founder skill set is, and if you've already got to that stage, congratulations, you're at this point, you've made a success of something, but you may not have, nobody has that full rounded skill set. So you might want someone, for example, with a backing in finance, right, who can help you, make your, think about your strategic planning, thinking about your budgeting, and also the increased formality that comes once you have an investor on board. Your profit and loss statements, your cash flow, your projections need to be much more formal than before. So the way to kind of figure out a match, I suppose, is to be really self-aware about the things that you love doing, and that you're good at and able to do. And then we all have those areas that we feel more shaky on or less certain of. And that should be some of the skill set that you look to buy in. And then, of course, more nebulous than that is the personality fit, right? Is this a person who gives you energy? Is this a person who makes you feel strong and capable and reassured? Is this a person who is equally prepared to roll their sleeves up and get things done for you? Those are all good signs. If it's a person who makes you feel worried or de-energized or only puts obstacles in your way and that kind of thing, then that's not a good match. So it's such an important pairing to get right. And there's obviously no one. A great COO for one situation will be the totally wrong COO for another.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because there's two things that I would absolutely agree with, but would also take away from that conversation is. And in part one, it's that play to your strengths. So if you are the founder, if you are the CEO of a growing business, then play to your strengths. And, the COO role then gets defined to cover the weaknesses and to do the things that actually don't motivate you, don't bring you joy in life and all of those things. And I love that this description of, how do you get it to work, and that more nebulous kind of piece, as you say, and it's somebody that gives you energy. I love that, but that's always hard to find, isn't it? And then sometimes I suppose it's the relationship builds and you have to work on it, and it's about building trust as well, isn't it? Some of that doesn't always happen overnight.
Yeah, that trust piece is so important because there will come moments, of course there will, along the journey where you mightn't immediately agree on something, or you're both really busy and the other person does something and you don't know why they did it, and there's got to be that trust between you that whatever the person did, they're doing it from the right place. There's a reason for it. Let's not overreact. We'll talk about it in time. The founder CEO has got to feel always that the COO has their back, is taking care of all the things in the background, and the COO has to believe in the strategic vision of the founder chief exec, ultimately believe in and wholeheartedly want to support the direction that's going.
Brilliant. And I suppose that then comes into play is, what kind of interactions would, in the smaller businesses you've worked with, have between kind of CEO and the chief exec or the founder in terms of reporting and, is there any sort of recommendations that you make there that help build that trust?
Well, initially, of course, it comes back to the strategy, the vision, the reason for, the company, the product, the service, whatever it is, and having a really clear shared vision for where that's going to go and what the steps are that are going to need to achieve that success. And a COO can be very helpful in working with the CEO on that, to say, okay, I hear it, I'm excited by it, but let me help you break it down. Let me help you take that, 3-5 year goal, and let's talk about, the steps that are going to be needed to get there. So that's obviously the first and almost, most important fundamental conversation about where you jointly want to take this. As well, shared values, belief on culture. If you're at the point of you're taking people on, you're espousing values and stuff, those have to be really, really well shared. But then after that, if that's there and that trust is there, as long as you're agreeing on the goals, in my experience, the best relationships are the one where you can kind of a little bit leave each other to it then, the CEO says, right, like, you understand my vision for people, for process, for technology, for, our how we're going to face off to customers, all that sort of thing, go do it, go execute. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to find new customers and I'm going to talk, to the press, and I'm going to, and I'm going to be that public face. And when you have that kind of trust and that delineation, it's enormously empowering then. And then obviously it's for the two of you to figure out what your cadence is of meeting, how often you check in with each other, what things you want to see. So I can I can think of a really good relationship I had with one chief exec where like they were totally happy to be out there, front and center, visiting sites, going on, doing the interviews, safe in the knowledge that I was at home on the ranch almost, that I was kind of running things and keeping safe.
Brilliant. And it's really interesting. It's only as we just have this conversation, I kind of reflect on my own journey and the journey of building the business tax advisory firm Inspire, and before we exited it. And yeah, I mean, we, me, Andrew, Chris, as kind of, I suppose public facing, driving the business, growing the business, and me as the founder. Our world changed actually when we brought in a lady called Bev, and she grew into the role, and effectively we made her an associate director to drive the ops side. But
Brilliant.
she was fulfilling that COO role, and it's only now clicked.
You didn't call it that, but that's what she was.
We didn't call it that, and I suppose that's what probably most owner-managed SME businesses have got. They've got that person driving the business, kind of the external face, but who's the internal face? Who's, as you say, looking after the ranch at home, looking after the ranch, allowing them to do that. And we had, that great, 5-6 years as we, came towards exit of Bev in that role, and she was fundamental in us achieving the things we wanted to achieve, because I had complete trust. You threw things at her, and she just got on with it. And she'd report back to say, this is, here's a red light. What do you want me to do? But generally was just, if it was green, it was kind of like, I'm just going to get on, going to deal with it. And she had the trust of Andrew, Chris and I to do that. And that probably is exactly what you're describing, isn't it?
Exactly right. And as you say, it's so liberating when everyone knows where those red lines are. They know when they want to get a warning or get a heads up, but otherwise you can just plow on and plow forward. And COO, Chief Operating Officer, is a grandiose term. It doesn't apply to every organization, but I think, the essence of it is something that I think every organization, when it gets to a certain size, definitely needs.
And what did you enjoy so much about fulfilling that COO role?
Gosh.
Because you've done that for some really large corporates. So it must be a high pressurized environment.
Yeah, and to be clear, I've been in the COO function of some very large corporates, and I've been COO of some slightly smaller ones as well. But let me see, I think one of the most satisfying things I did, I worked for a fintech that was backed by a very large bank, and we were literally setting up everything from scratch. The reason they wanted to set this up was they wanted to move with more agility and with more speed, but obviously still to bear in mind that you were lending people money, you were regulated, and all of the responsibilities that took. And one of the things I found really satisfying was to take all of the policies and procedures of that big industrial large organization, but then translate it down into 30 relatively short, 2-3 page pithy policy statements that we could actually use in a fintech setting. So it preserved the integrity and the essence and the spirit of all of the things that the larger bank wanted to preserve, and with its reputation and brand and responsibility, but actually gave us a little bit of agility to move. So that sounds really nerdy. I set up a policy framework, but for me, it was deeply satisfying, because when we had that done, it actually empowered the organization to move really, really quickly.
And just put the foot on the gas and grow and do its thing, I suppose. And one of the other things that interests me, and it probably comes down to that understanding the release of the trust from sort of founder, CEO to a number 2, a COO, is that piece around you, as you describe the role, and it makes complete sense. The role is very wide and broad, covering, those variety. I think you said 16 different areas, and, IT and HR and operations and all of those, and R&D and all of those kind of things. I've only got to 4. So, but how do you deal with needing to have knowledge in all of those different areas? Surely it just blows your mind, Jennifer.
That was absolutely the challenge, and I was fortunate and kind of got through by chance and good luck and right place at the right time. I got initially catapulted into an interim COO role, and then ended up staying, and it became a fuller time role. And I remember coming to the role, and I'd had experience in I'd qualified as a chartered accountant, I had risk, I had some exposure to legal, finance, and all that kind of thing, and so I had a pretty good grounding. But then I came in and I was like, oh my goodness, looking at all these other things that needed to happen. And, the way I dealt with it was, first of all, being very upfront about, where I did and didn't have skills, but obviously then voracious research, asking friends, digging deep, obviously asking the people, the teams, and learning my trade as quickly as I could. And the spur for the book was, for me researching that role, and I was like, where is the book? Like, where is the handbook? I want to know the frameworks, I want to know the standards, I want to know the regulation behind all of this. And I sort of had to find all those things and pull them together. And so I promised myself when I finished that role that I would try and put that together and you know, make it available to people. And the lovely thing, that book is 5 years old now, and some things will have moved on, but I would still say on average once a month, I get an email from someone going, "Thank you so much for that. You really helped me." It was, you know, that was really helpful. Yeah.
Brilliant. And how, I mean, we'll touch on the books, you know, so you wrote your first book in 5 years ago, and in September released the second book, How to be a Chief Risk Officer. How have you found writing books? You know, like, what's the experience been of being an author?
Yeah, it's definitely not something I, you know, said I was always going to do or anything like that. And as I say, the first one was born out of an experience of kind of saying, God, there's a gap here, you know, and I think there's a space and I'm going to try it. And it's one of those things, it's great to talk about it because you don't know how to do something until you know how to do something. And I was able to find there's an online self-publishing school, it's called, which I, you know, paid to join, and they had all sorts of kind of how-tos and guides and frameworks on how to get self-published. And, you know, one of the wonderful things about, you know, Amazon and these platforms is there is a platform there for you to self-publish a book. And there are all sorts of marketplaces and places you can go to get good copy editing done, good cover design, you know, marketing, branding, all that kind of thing. So, you know, I didn't know how to do it before I set off, but, you know, they helped answer my questions, and then I, you know, figured out. And, you know, you still obviously are completely responsible for the quality of the output, you know, the accuracy and that kind of thing, and that's you and that's your brand. But the help is there to do the things that you don't need to do, and that was a light bulb moment for me to show that, you know, to realize I could do that.
Brilliant. And the first one couldn't have been too painful because you wrote the second book. So. And was it like that? Was it like the difficulty of the second album for a music artist?
Yeah, my husband kept saying, "Oh, the difficult second album." I was like, "Stop saying that." It was probably a little bit like having a baby. You know, when I finished the first one, I was like, "I'm never doing that again." And a little bit of time passes, and then I was kind of ready for another one. So I had to treat it as a full-time job. I couldn't. There's no way I could have had a full-time job and then come home in the evening and written for 2 hours and that kind of thing. So I was able to do it in a gap between roles. And I kind of treat it like a job. You know, sit down at your desk at, you know, 8:30, 9 o'clock, whatever it is, cup of coffee, right? You know, sit. And even when you're, and the other thing is when you structure your thoughts. You know, I said 16 disciplines. When I started the risk book, I had a very clear idea in my mind for how I wanted to break down the different aspects of risk. And that framework is honestly half the battle. Once I said both times, once I'd written the table of contents, I knew the book would get written. Because it's then, I mean, I'm simplifying it, but it's then almost filling in the gaps, definitely. You know, the kind of way, like, you know what each chapter is going to be about. You just have to write 20 essays on, you know, each particular topic. But some days you don't feel it. You've got no idea what you're going to say, but you still sit down and you start writing and you start typing. Somebody said, Liz Gilbert said, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, said it's like clearing your throat. You know, sometimes the first paragraph or two you write is going to be absolute rubbish and you won't use it. But you're clearing your throat and you're getting started, and then eventually something comes.
Then you find your voice, definitely. So as we talk about, you know, that second book, we should probably talk about risk and how that maybe, you know, managing risk applies within an organisation, and again, perhaps how that relates to a sort of SME and an owner-managed business. I suppose my first question around that CRO role and undertaking that within any organisation is, how do you do that how do you kind of manage risk without stifling ideas and progress?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as you say, even if you don't have that kind of distinct risk function, you as a founder, and you want your people to be not afraid of, not kind of, you know, scared into paralysis, but, you know, consciously aware of the things that could impact upon your plans, and to the extent you can, putting in place mitigants to those risks along the way. And that's really what the role of a CRO, like a good CRO, is. I think a lot of the time the risk area can get a bit of a bad rap. It's seen as you know, the department of no. It's seen as the place where people pour cold water on your ideas and tell you all the things that could go wrong and all that sort of thing. And certainly having an awareness of potential downsides is important. It should be with a view to how you can make something succeed, right? So one of the things I write about is it's really important as a CRO to believe in the business, to believe in the strategy, to believe in the success of the venture, and to be invested in that success, so that when you say, well, let's just have a think about this, is this right, what about this, and so on, people believe that you're doing it from a place of wanting the organization to succeed. And again, a little bit like what we said about the red lines and the framework, you said it perfectly earlier on. If you can work with the rest of the organization, you can say, look, we can do this as long as, we can put out PR releases as long as we adhere to these rules. We can lend to this part of the population as long as we have these safeguards in place. Whatever those things are, that kind of as long as we can, if, can actually be very empowering to people, because then they know they've got free, they know they're protected, they know they're, in line with the regulations, and that they've got some freedom to operate in that space. And then when they get to an area where they're not sure or feeling a little bit, like they might be getting close, that's when you raise your hand and have a conversation. So risk should be empowering, not stifling.
Yeah, not stifling. That's brilliant. And I suppose, that's a great description, isn't it? It's about knowing what playing field you're on. So if you're within an organisation, what's my playing field? Where's my boundaries? Yeah. And obviously your kind of risk experience, as you've alluded to, has been very much in the sort of financial services kind of area. How do you think risk management applies to a general product, business, a general services business turning over £5 million? I mean, how should they be addressing risk management, do you think?
So, trying to answer.
It's quite a big
general,
question. I know,
I'm immediately thinking, I'm thinking about your business. You said you were offering kind of, finance and advice and all that kind of thing. First of all, you've obviously got to know the regulation in the space. So, if you're creating a product, you've got to know the safety regs. If you're doing services or giving advice, you've got to, know the qualifications from behind that. So, obviously, knowing the legal and regulatory space in which you operate is key. And if there are quality standards that you need to adhere to, an ISO standard or whatever it is, that that's obviously very, very important. Horizon scanning and looking at what is going on in the industry, the direction of travel, what people are worrying about, what the trends are, and so on is hugely important. You learn an awful lot by looking at your peer group and seeing what's happening there. And then obviously sometimes looking broader beyond the industry to see is there a broader trend as well that could potentially come and, infect your part of the world and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So, it's a great, one of the things I offer is sort of just like a pyramid of risks. So you can think about everything from kind of strategy to more operational things, but just as a little bit of an almost checklist in your mind that, every now and again you should be taking time out to think, have I really thought about this? Has anything changed? Do I need to up my controls in this space? I've got more volume here now. I had a complaint last week. Whatever it is, what are those things telling you that maybe just need you to do something to tweak and improve your controls as a result?
It's great, really good practical advice. And I also like that term, that kind of horizon scanning, because it kind of also, in my mind, maybe it's the way my mind works, sees, well, actually, how are we going to manage risk and what is coming on the horizon? But therefore, if you're looking forward, you can always also see that where's the opportunity. If we can manage this risk better, if we could overcome this risk better than anybody else, there'd be opportunity, wouldn't there?
Absolutely. And you're right, and we don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about the upside risk. And actually, there was a great case study I read recently about a COO that saw that there was going to be a huge spike in, I think it might have been semiconductor chips or something like that, and did a huge bulk purchase in advance of the problem, secured the price, got the stock on site, and averted 6 months of supply chain worry and increasing prices and that sort of thing. And that sort of, you can either say the risk avoided or opportunity seized, but those, it's just as much about that kind of forward-looking view, that anticipation that I'm seeing something here. I think we can take action on that. And absolutely, there is upside risk as well as downside.
Definitely. And obviously, one of the sort of risks that probably none of us really foresaw recently, and hate to talk about it, but we've got to talk about it, I suppose, was the pandemic. And what effect do you think the pandemic had on the assessment of risk? And do you think it's accelerated a better understanding that we need to be able to foresee risk better?
I mean, we have had some once in a century type events take place in the past 3 years. which absolutely have, as well as some technological advances that have changed things. So it's been a really interesting time for risk management. So when I think about the day I was working in a fintech, we were a cloud-based company. So all of our technology was in the cloud, and we one afternoon we closed our laptops. We were going to have a trial working from home day the next day. This was at the beginning, sort of February 2020, and we never came back. Right, like we went home that day, and then we didn't come back. But because of our technology, it was pretty seamless, people, and, tribute to the technology choices that we had made, but of course the resilience and the ingenuity of the people as well. We forget how we pivoted and moved to new ways of working so very quickly. So it helped us appreciate technology, hybrid ways of working, and trusting our people, and that gave us resilience, didn't it? That sort of trust in our people and finding new ways of working gave us resilience. But then you're right, it forced us to be much more resourceful in terms of how we reacted to things. So food supply had to be maintained, medical supply had to be maintained, restaurants had to pivot overnight to become food supply services with recipe boxes and that kind of thing. So we gained probably a new appreciation for some sort of neglected industries. The people who kept us safe and who kept us fed and all that kind of thing during that time. And of course, since then, it's not like it ended with the pandemic, is it? We've got supply chain issues that we never had before in this way. We've got geopolitical risk. We've got, for those of you who work in any kind of financial services sector, we've had really stable, low to zero interest rates, and all of a sudden, they're on the increase, and currency rates are changing. So those of you who trade internationally will, be seeing the impact of the dollar, for example. So it's a really interesting time. There's an awful lot going on. And I think the watchword, the thing I take away more than anything else, is resilience. So, and that means, resilience in your supply chain, perhaps not being over reliant on one supplier for something, building that resilience in your people and, those trusting hybrid ways of working, resilience of operations, not being overly reliant on any one thing. That's the new thing. So rather than risk management is still there, but it's about resilience and about maybe preventing those problems happening in the first place.
Great. Gonna also just want to touch on a bit of your career, and I just want to see what you see the difference was, perhaps, because you've worked in the charitable sector as well as the financial services and corporate sector. What were the unique challenges and differences that you saw working between those different sectors? Are they much the same? And it's probably our perception as, business leaders that we see a difference in the way in those organisations, you would fulfil the COO or the CRO role in those.
Yeah, some things the same, some things different. So, I was very fortunate to get the opportunity to work at Save the Children for a few years. And, one of the things I was happy to see in my early days was, they had reached the end of one strategic period, and they needed a sort of a new kind of 15-year strategy. They needed a 3-year plan that would hang off of that, with all the things to put in place, all the programs that they wanted to do. They, at the time, needed, an upgrade to their finance systems, their HR systems, and they needed a building upgrade. And I remember kind of thinking, I know how to do it. That's great. I know this. I'm on familiar territory. I know how to do these things. Of course, there were lots of things that I didn't know about, and I had to dig really deep and learn and be humble and help, where I could as well. But I think some of the differences, of course, in the not-for-profit sector, you have to be so ingenious and so resourceful in terms of how you use resources, right? Every penny, you don't want to waste a thing. You want to be, really, really prudent in the management of everything that you have under you. And sometimes I had a brilliant CTO at the time who used to be able to extract quite a bit of value from his providers because they were a not-for-profit. So it can help if you deploy that well. But I think the other big thing was the motivation of the people in the organization. So people join not-for-profit organizations for a completely different set of reasons than they get a job in the commercial sector, and they come with a very strong ingrained value set. And I think in the sort of in the for-profit space, it can be, it's quite an obedient sector. We're getting paid to do a job. We come in and, and largely, kind of do what we're told and that sort of thing. And I had to completely alter my communication style. I had to really get people invested in the vision, in the why we were doing something, because they're just intrinsically motivated in a very different way. So that was a skill I had to pick up.
Brilliant. I can absolutely kind of see that difference between the two. One, has got that strong reason and why, and that's why people work for those organisations. And they're more commercially driven kind of world. You've got to kind of install the why or get that collective team spirit going. So as we sort of start to conclude our conversation, I suppose one of the questions I've got for you, which, again, will be exactly the same as a parallel with a business owner, business leader within a sort of SME kind of finder, is that those roles must have been highly pressurized. I can only imagine the pressure at times for filling some of those roles within your kind of CV and some of those that you've explained during the course of this conversation. So and you used the word resilience just now, how did you make sure you were resilient to that pressure, and how did you cope as a human with the pressure that you're under?
Yeah, gosh, it is true. There is no doubt that both roles come with a lot of responsibility and at times, some anxiety, when you're doing things like managing safety in buildings, right? That's an enormous responsibility when you're dealing with an adverse PR event or something like that. Like these things are extremely challenging and worrying. And I suppose the first thing is, and in both my books, I talk a little bit about the personality traits of a COO CRO, and it's helpful to kind of think about like how are you going to feel about that? How are you going to cope with that? How are your resources? God, I think you've got to look after yourself. All of the obvious things in terms of health and balance and rest, and having things outside to kind of give you perspective. I think having a really strong support group, and that isn't just your like partner or spouse who we can sometimes really lean on far too much. But if you a coach, a mentor, someone to sound off with, or somebody who's in the same space as you and can relate to some of the challenges that you have as well. It's really helpful to be able to kind of bounce those things off somebody else. So and just remembering why you came to that role in the first place, remembering everything that's great about that role, and showing up with energy even on the tough days, I think is key.
Brilliant. A very all-encompassing answer, and I get all of that, and I suppose that's partly why Evolve exists, because we see the benefit of putting people in similar situations and like-minded people in a room together and just getting them to share. We talk about sharing their good, their bad, and their mad, kind of what's going on in the world, and then building the rapport with that consistent group of people to provide that support. And it does make, we see the transformation that can make. So, I suppose my final question, I'm sure you've listened to some of the podcasts, Jennifer, so going to finish with my final question, which is, what does, given all of those experiences, now taking some time out, writing the books, reflecting on life, what does success mean for you?
Gosh, I think we're living in a very changed and changing world. And when I listen to some of your podcasts, Warren, I'm amazed at the ingenuity of the people and the variety of the different roles that there are out there and things that we never imagined before. So that is a moving feast, isn't it? But I suppose there's something about, and I'm well, in the middle, shall we say, I'll be complimentary to myself, in the middle of my career, but I was well along in my career before I maybe stopped and asked myself some of the questions about like, who am I? What are my values? What do I bring to the world? And then what's the best use of those? And I suppose success is maybe finding that intersection of something that the world needs right now and something that you do really well, and get something out of enjoying that. And if you can find that, and that you're adding value, that you're bringing a service or a good or something to the world that it didn't have before in a different way, or you're helping people be better, and you're using the best of yourself, that probably is the purest expression of success I can think of.
Brilliant. Love that. Really good. Jennifer, if people want to learn more about you, they want to know where they can get the books, where can they go?
The books are available on Amazon: How to be a Chief Operating Officer, How to be a Chief Risk Officer. I'm on a website, www.coo-author.com. Jennifer Geary, you can find me on LinkedIn. Would love to keep the conversation going, and best of luck and all good wishes to all of your listeners and all those founders out there starting new organizations. It's fantastic.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer, for being a great guest on the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My hope with every episode is that you've learned something new or heard something that challenged your way of thinking and further motivated you on your path towards becoming a more knowledgeable, informed and inspired individual and business leader. If you enjoyed this episode, then please help us by rating, reviewing and subscribing. We really value your feedback and would love to have you along for future episodes. And please don't forget to learn more about Evolve by going to evolvemembers.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.